Should video games really cost $80? Should they cost $100 for that matter? Now, this conversation is coming up once again, and from a very unlikely place. I never thought that Nintendo would be the one to set the new bar for this stuff. I say that with love because I've been a Nintendo fan for many years, all the way back to, the N64, the Super Nintendo, the very first consoles that they made, the GameCube. I owned all of those. I love Zelda, I love Smash Bros, I love Pokemon, right? So I'm not trying to diss them or dog on them, but Nintendo games just don't scream AAA to me personally. Don't get me wrong, they're fun. They just don't scream, $300 million worth of development costs that justify a price hike. So it's interesting that they're the ones setting the new bar for this. With the announcement of the Nintendo Switch 2, also came the very shocking news that their new games are going to start costing $80 as opposed to $60 or $70 for traditional AAA games that we've been seeing now. Nintendo seems to think that they're the ones that can raise the bar now to $80. If you thought it was going to be GTA, if you thought it was going to be The Elder Scrolls, you were wrong. It was actually Mario Kart of all games. And it's not like this game is super special or something where somebody at Nintendo just went crazy and put 100 million hours worth of content there or something. Our bad. We ended up going a little bit overboard, so we need to charge a little bit more for this one game. No, they've announced that this is the new standard for their games. All of them for the Switch 2 are going to be $80. It hasn't been that long since we saw the jump between the $60 price point for AAA games go up to $70, and now we're already talking about $80. It just really does feel like not enough time has gone by since the last price hike to justify yet another hike. So now all of your Zeldas, your Smash Bros, your Mario games, all of those games coming out are going to be $80, and that has sparked once again the debate of how much should video games really cost? I feel like I have a little bit of a unique perspective here, not just because of my age. I've been around since the very first consoles. Like, I wasn't around for the Atari, but since the very first Nintendo consoles, and I owned them, right? I owned the Super Nintendo. I owned an N64. I owned a GameCube. I was around for all of that. And I was also a consumer in two different countries, right? I'm a foreigner. So I got to see how the evolution of gaming and the price hikes in general for video games, how that affected the average gamer, not just in the United States and North America, but also in South America where I'm from. I think that this is a good thing to bring up because I think a lot of people don't realize how price hikes really affect the global market way more than they affect like North America and Europe. Like, Americans are already mad about a $10 or $20 price hike on their game. Imagine when you translate that to, say, where I'm from, reais, where $20 is like $100, $120 at certain points. The currency exchange rate is really always fluctuating, right? Every day it's different, but generally speaking right now, it's really bad. Like, particularly with the Brazilian real, the dollar to the real is like 5 to 1 or 6 to 1 at certain points. It's in between those two numbers. The way that people seem to think about it is they say, okay, this game is 500 reais in Brazil, because that's right now how much a AAA game costs. Like Assassin's Creed Shadows right now in Brazil is 517 reais. I'll tell that to an American and they'll say, okay, well, how much is that in dollars? Okay, well, that is the equivalent of like $80 or $90 or whatever. Okay, there's importation taxes. That's not so bad, right? It's basically the equivalent. And that's not really how it works. Not everybody, right? But a lot of people don't seem to realize this, is that they're thinking like a tourist, right? The currency exchange rates, how much something, is valued in dollars, does not matter for somebody in South America, for example. The only thing that matters is how much you're charging in that local currency. The only people that care about foreign exchange rates and whatnot are investors, right, that are trading currency, and tourists, right? So if you're an American tourist and if you go to Brazil right now and you take $1,000, you have like 6,000 reais or something like that. You're going to have a really good time. So it definitely affects tourism, right? But that's the only people that really care about that. The locals don't care how much the game is in proportion to the dollar. It doesn't matter to them because they get paid in the local currency. They get paid in reais. And one thing to understand that helps kind of put this into perspective is that pretty much Brazil translates very, close to what the dollar translates to when it comes to the local economy. What I mean by that is basically a buck means a buck. A real means a dollar. So things are not that much more expensive in reais because they're proportional to the dollar. That's not the case other than like imports. So what does that actually mean? It means that if you go to the grocery store and you buy, say, a jug of milk, you're not paying like 1,000 reais for a jug of milk. It's pretty equivalent what you're paying in dollars, but you're paying in reais. Brazil, like many other South American countries, is not like Venezuela, right? Where it's like 1,000,000 shekels equals $1, where the price of the currency, like the weight of the actual currency, is worth more than the currency itself. That's not the case with Brazilian money. And then something I'll often hear is people will say, okay, well then the average Brazilian must make, say, 200,000 reais because, the currency is so devalued. And that is actually not the case at all, which makes this an even bigger issue because the average Brazilian receives less per month in reais than the average American receives per month in dollars. So that hopefully kind of puts that into perspective. The Brazilian real is not like the yen, right? Where $1 equals 1,000,000 yen or whatever, or 1,000,000 shekels. It's really not. Usually an American buck is kind of the equivalent of a Brazilian buck when you think about it in local currency. It's not like, our rent is cheaper than the American rent. It's kind of the same. So if Americans or Canadians or Europeans are shocked with the gaming price hikes, imagine for Brazilians where a new game right now, a new AAA game that just came out, costs like over 500 reais, I think 517. Imagine you watching this video, perhaps as the average American kid when you were little, going up to your mom and asking for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 or whatever, and the game is like 500 bucks. Would your mom buy that for you? Probably not. So that is the case for a lot of Brazilians, right? So price hikes really affect the global market more than anything, and that is a huge chunk of the sales. Like you might say, okay, this is interesting, but I don't care because I'm Canadian, I'm American, or I'm European, so this doesn't really affect me that much, which I think that most people are reasonable and don't feel that way, but even if you do feel that way, it does really affect everything, and especially affects the developers and their sales numbers. They're the ones that are really going to get screwed. There certainly are games that Brazilians are just obsessed with, right? Any FIFA game, you throw like a sparking zero in there, you could charge 1,000 reais for that. Somebody would find a way to donate an organ to buy one of those games. Like some games, people will find the money, but that's not the case with most games. And Nintendo does have some of that core audience, right? A lot of people like Zelda. A lot of Brazilians like Smash Bros. It's super nostalgic for them. Super Smash Bros. Melee was huge. Pretty much everybody that I know played that in Smash Bros. Brawl. That was the thing, man. So they do have that going for them, that nostalgia component that some games also have. But it's such a large price hike in a country where, you think inflation is bad in the United States, it's awful in Brazil, man. It's really bad there too. So people here right now don't have a lot of disposable income. In Brazil, man, it's even tougher. And it's not like, things are cheaper. It's not like groceries are cheaper. It's not like cars are cheaper. It's not like refrigerators are cheaper. Most things are imported, right? Other than food, most things are imported. So put yourself in that position, right? You're already paying $500 for a new game. Imagine that game goes up $20. Well, the game just went up $100. Would you pay an extra $100 on top of the $500 you're already paying for new games? Like, that is a huge ask. And of course, I'm using Brazil as an example because that's where I'm from. That is like the only place I can actually, have a firsthand knowledge and experience to actually know what I'm talking about. But I'm sure this affects people in India. I'm sure it affects people in other Asian countries. I'm sure it affects people in the Middle East and other South American countries. It's not just Brazil, but I'm using Brazil as an example because I think it's a good example because the dollar translates pretty well to the equivalent of what the real is. Not currency exchange wise, but your purchasing power within that local economy is fairly equivalent. So it's a good thing to put into perspective. So I think they're going to end up getting kind of screwed on this one. And again, it's not going to be because of the national market. I think that a lot of Americans, even if upset, even if reluctant, they're going to want the new Zelda. They're going to cough up the extra money, right? Extra $10 or $20 for a lot of people. It's not that much money compared to like $100 or 120, right? I think that they're going to get screwed on the global market. You can't just rely on the national North American and European market. You're missing half of the globe there. Half of your sales are going to be gone. I just bring this up because it's just wild for me to think about, how many games I have now as an American on my Steam library versus when I was living in Brazil, like my life as a kid. It's just such a far apart reality when it comes specifically to gaming, other things as well. But when we're talking about gaming, man, it's like Earth to the sun, the moon to Mars. It's like worlds apart, man. So it's hard to even put it into context to really even grasp this stuff. That's why I'm kind of doing this exercise and kind of explaining because I think a lot of people don't even know this or don't realize it. I have vivid memories as a kid, begging my parents and my grandparents and whatnot for video games, and it was always a struggle. Like I maybe got one new game a year, and my family was like upper middle class. We're like middle to upper. Imagine if we were lower middle class or actual lower class. Like when do you ever get to buy a game? Like very few people can even partake in this hobby. I remember I really wanted a game. I think it was at the time I was little. It was like Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm. It was either the first or the second one. And I was really into Naruto. I really, really wanted that game. And it was like, I don't remember if it was like 260 bucks at the time or like 320. Somewhere between 250 and 320 was the cost of the game. And I don't even think that was full price for the game, to be honest with you. Which is why Brazil has always had, especially with the PS2, such a big pirating scene, right? There's so many games that are just pirated, and it's for that reason. Like a new game is 300 bucks, even at that time. And we're talking like 20 years ago. I'm not talking today. Keep in mind, I'm 30 years old. So when I'm saying that, I was asking my mom for a game as a kid, I'm talking like when I was 10. So what, 20 years ago, the games were already 300 bucks? Now they're 5. Just imagine trying to ask your mom for that. When the PlayStation 5 came out, I think that Brazil had one of the, if not the most expensive PlayStation 5. It was something ridiculous, like something between 5 and 7,000 reais or bucks for the game, man, the console. And then after you spend like 5 grand on the console, you then have to explain to your parents, oh, it's not like an Atari from when you were a kid where, it comes with games. Now we gotta buy separate games, and each one of those games is now $500. Or I'm sorry, in this case, 500 reais. But you get what I'm saying. Like, as a kid, even as an adult, man, how can you justify spending 500 bucks in a new game? You're only gonna buy those few games that you really, really want. So some games will succeed, like GTA, whatever they price it at. People will find a way to sell a kidney and buy it whatever country they're in. It will succeed. Now, the average mediocre to slop AAA game, if they try to pull this off and sell it for even a higher price, I think they're going to fail. I think that a big reason why a lot of these AAA games are already failing is because, global market is just not there for a lot of them. Even if you think a game is cool, like it might be $40 cool, is it 500 bucks cool though? Probably not, man. You're not going to take that many chances. You're going to buy that one FIFA game once a year. You're going to buy the Dragon Ball game that came out, the Sparking Zero one, because Brazilians just freaking love Dragon Ball. You're going to buy the Smash Bros game, whatever it is. You're going to buy GTA. Maybe, there's a couple of guys that'll buy Baldur's Gate, but most Brazilians, man, even if you're really well off, it's just, you didn't become rich by being stupid with your money either, and a $500 purchase is kind of a stupid purchase for a video game you're going to play for like 10 or 12 hours and never play again. I remember as a kid, man, I would replay the same games over and over and over, right? I remember like Fallout New Vegas. When I bought that game, I've replayed that game, dude, at least, I've actually finished that game at least 60 times, man, because there's nothing else for you to play. You get one game a year. You better really, really choose well what that game is going to be, because that's it. Anyway, I'm going to move on from this point now. Let's talk about actual numbers and inflation, but I just wanted to talk about this. I hope I'm not trying to shame or dog on Americans or Europeans with what I'm saying. Like, I'm not trying to call anybody ignorant. It's just that, a lot of people don't know about this. And I think it's interesting to put it into perspective, really. But, if you ask me about how things work in the Middle East, I wouldn't know, right? So I can only talk about what I know. I think that a lot of people don't know about this, so I think it's kind of cool to put it into perspective, but I'm not shaming anybody, man. Like, Everybody only knows what they know. The only reason I know about this is because I lived there, right? I was raised there and I have a unique experience that I get to share with you, but you're not any less knowledgeable or dumber or ignorant for not knowing this. Okay, so with all of that having been said now, let's go to point number one, which is the cost of goods and inflation. How much should a game cost based on the rate of inflation, based on wages, based on times change? I think that most people get how this works, so we don't need to spend too much time on it, but it's the idea that when your grandfather was a little kid, with $0.25, he could buy a saltwater taffy, a Coca-Cola, a ticket to take the trolley wherever he wanted to go, and he could buy a house. Now, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that extreme, but you get what I mean. A lot of your grandparents bought their houses for a few $1,000s, right? As a matter of fact, I know some boomers where I live that bought their house for like 40 grand. Not that long ago, as a matter of fact, like maybe 20 years ago, but in the grand scheme of things, not that long ago. And now those same houses are worth like $350,000 to $500,000, right? So the cost of things has gone up a lot, and housing is a different market, but it's just to put it in perspective. Groceries now cost a lot more money. Wages have gone up. Just thinking, myself personally, when I was a teenager, I think my first job, I was either 15 or 16 years old. I think I was 16. I used to be paid 9 point something. I used to make just over $9 an hour, right? In that same place, that same minimum wage average bracket is like $15 an hour now. Granted, I'm a little older, I'm 30 years old, so this was like a decade and a half ago, but still, wages have gone up. Now, of course, there's a separate conversation here, which does tie in indirectly to this conversation as well, but I'm not going to get too much into it because it's not the point of the video, but you might say that wages have not kept pace with the cost of goods or the cost of life, right? Even though minimum wage or the average wage in your area has in fact gone up, it has not kept pace with the cost of goods and the cost of living, right? That is very true, and it does tie into this conversation. It's not directly what we're talking about because one thing doesn't have to do with the other, but it does matter when it comes to consumer sentiment. It matters because it affects the amount of disposable income one might have to buy a video game, which right now, for most people, is not a whole lot. So it matters indirectly for sure, but it doesn't tie into this particular projection. If we were to just take into account a few economic factors and throw a projection into something like ChatGPT, it will say that based on inflation, wages, and all that, a game actually should now cost between $90 to $95. Believe it or not, that should be the price of a AAA game, $90 to $95. Now, with that said, this is taking into account the average cost to make the average AAA game, which means that it's factoring in companies that are highly, highly inefficient also, like Ubisoft, that are spending $300 million to make a game that you have no idea where the money even went for it to have cost that much. So this number is also not exactly super fair or super efficient. It's taking everything into account, then looking at wages, inflation, and saying that the game should cost $90 to $95 as of 2025. But even if we were to run this exact same projection and only use the good studios, the ones that are the most efficient, and we cut costs and only use like the most essential people that should be part of the development of the game, only essentials. And we're only considering the best studios that make the best games with the most efficient budget. It's the same projection is still saying that the game should cost between $70 to $75. That should be the more reasonable price point, also accounting for market sentiment and what consumers, generally speaking, are willing to spend. Now, I don't know where it's getting all of this data from. I'm just spitballing here. I'm just kind of giving you an example. Like if we run the numbers, this is where it should be, right? So technically asking $80 for a game, in theory, it's not that exorbitant. It's not immoral. I don't think there's a morality question here, but it's not that far off. And it sucks to say it because the reality is, and this ties into my next point, I wouldn't be willing to pay $80 for Mario Kart. I mean, screw all of this data. I don't care if it's fair or not. I don't care if it's reasonable or not, or if it's, based on inflation, based on wages, whatever you want to say, based on whatever, even if logically or economically, $80 does make sense based on the year that we're in and based on these projections, I'm still not going to buy it. I don't care. And I think that this is really what it comes down to, which is my second point here, market sentiment, what people are actually willing to pay. That is really all that matters. I shouldn't say that that's the only thing that matters, because if every studio makes a game, ends up on the red, then we're not going to have any games at all, right? Things need to cost what they need to cost at a bare minimum for a reason, right? But I also think that there's truth in greasing the wheels, moving product. Sometimes it's better to not sell a product for as expensive, but sell more of that same product for a little bit less. You're going to end up with more money if more copies get sold. Dare I say that, even if upset, even if they don't agree with it, most people would probably be willing to pay $80 for GTA 6 if it keeps, if it's as good as its predecessors have been. Hell, I would have been willing to pay $80 for Red Dead 2. The problem then becomes when you start charging $80 for Mario Kart, or you charge $80 for Skull and Bones, or an Assassin's Creed game, games that people perceive as not as valuable or not as much bang for your buck as something like a Rockstar game. So I think that that is a bigger component than any of this economic nonsense discussion we just had. It doesn't matter what the economics of it are. If the game sucks and people don't see the value, even if you do the numbers, this is what it should be, it doesn't matter. People are still not going to buy it. You're still not entitled to anybody's business regardless. I think in general, there's a big sentiment, which I understand, which is people just don't want things to get more expensive. Like, it hasn't been that long since the last price hike, and now we're seeing another one. I think that a lot of people, rightfully so, feel that way. And it's not even about if the game is good, if the economics say it's not, or what. They just don't want to pay more for their games. More and more, gaming is going to start to feel like an exclusive hobby, like a rich boys type of activity, not so much something that everybody can do and enjoy. There's also the other component to that, which I think is going to be piracy. Like, if you make games way too expensive, like, people are just going to pirate the game. So I think that all of these factors need to be taken into account. And I am sure that there is, I'm already seeing it, an anti-Nintendo movement. Like, people are going to boycott Nintendo. Now, is it going to work or not? Is Nintendo probably going to fail or succeed with this? I don't know, because Nintendo is very niche. Like, Nintendo has a very dedicated core audience of people, and a lot of those people are like the masses. A lot of families, and I hate to use this word, which is calling people normies, but a lot of normies that are just like the dad, the mom with a couple kids, they see Nintendo games as, a good gaming system and games for their kids. It's not super violent, it's fun, it's something that they can do with their kids. It's kind of like fun for the whole family. And Nintendo also owns very beloved and exclusive IPs that only they have access to. Like, would you pay $80 for Tears of the Kingdom? I probably would. Now, would I buy the Switch and pay $80 for all the games? I think that is where where I think that they might fail, because you're now requiring a different console. What I mean with that is that I already have a Nintendo Switch. So if Tears of the Kingdom came out, or a game that I really, really want or really, really like, and that game was $80, I would reluctantly probably still buy it. Now, if you make a new console, which is what they've done, and you're setting right off the bat that the new point of entry for these games is $80, I'm not buying the Switch 2. I'm not buying it. In my opinion, this is a pretty naive business decision. Like, I could turn out to be wrong, but in my opinion, you should boil the frog versus trying to burn it. Because if I worked at Nintendo and I was the guy in charge of making these decisions, I'm not saying that I support it or that I think that they should have done this. I'm just saying if it was me and that was my job, what I would have done is I would have first sold the consoles, I would have kept the games at the same price, and then within 1 or 2 years, then I would flip the Switch. Then I would jack up the price of the games to $80 at that point, because now you're married to the console. Now you bought it. What are you going to do now? Sell your console at a loss? You already bought into the hardware. What are you going to do? Do some sort of protest where you're never going to buy a Nintendo game again and just be stuck with your Switch? Maybe you and another 2 or 3 people would in fact do that, but the vast majority of individuals that already bought the console, at that point, they're already invested. They're already 2 or 3 years down the line. At that point, they would reluctantly cough up the extra $10 because what are they going to do, right? That's what I would do if I was a greedy bastard. If I was in charge of Nintendo and my job was just to make them money, that would be the smart business move to make. They are, however, not doing that. And I'm really not trying to defend Nintendo here because I think that $80 for any of their games is absurd, but you got to give them credit where credit is due. They're being pretty upfront about that, and you might even say that, well, hey, if they did in fact do what you're saying, that would just, buy a lot of bad will and they would go bankrupt as a company. No, they wouldn't. And they've already bought a lot of bad will as is. Everybody is already pissed off with them, just double down at that point. So I think that they're actually being pretty upfront and honest about it, even if I think that the price is absurd. And frankly, the sad part about all of this is that if anybody can pull this off and be successful, if there's a chance that this could work out, charging $80 for their games, it would be Nintendo. Nintendo would be the one that could pull it off. And the reason for that is because Nintendo has been absolutely brilliant with their business decisions. Although I hate them for it, I think that they're extremely consumer unfriendly. They've been pretty smart because they've created their own ecosystem. They've created their own universe of games that you can't go out of them to play. Like you can't buy Mario Kart, you can't buy Zelda, you can't buy Smash Bros on Steam. You are stuck with the Switch. There is no waiting for a Steam sale. There is no competition. Nintendo is not in competition with anybody other than with the consumer. They're in competition with themselves and themselves only. And they have managed to, over the years, develop a very diehard fan base that will probably buy the damn thing, no matter how stupidly priced it is. There's people that will buy it, and you're stuck in their universe, you're stuck with their hardware, you're stuck within their games, you can't go out of it. There's no competition, right? So Nintendo is Nintendo. The games that they make, only they make. And you might say, well, they're bad games. It's fine. A lot of people don't feel that way, and unfortunately, I think that if anybody could pull this off, it would in fact be Nintendo. I hope they fail, but they just might succeed because of the brand name, because of the household names that they have. Like, people really want to play the next Tears of the Kingdom. People really want to play the next Smash Bros. And I don't think that this new price hike is really gonna stop those diehard fans, those people out there. Now, I do think that where we might see a, potential failure will be that global market that I was talking about earlier. Like for an American that really, really loves Zelda and will want to buy and play Zelda no matter what, an extra $10 or $20, they'll find a way to cough it up, right? They'll do it reluctantly. They're not gonna be happy, but they're not going to not play the next Tears of the Kingdom. They're not going to not play the next Smash Bros. They will find the money even if they're upset. They're going to complain about it on Twitter, and they're going to support Nintendo anyway. Now, the global market, maybe not so much, because a $20 price hike is actually more like a $100 price hike in other countries, such as I've been talking about here in Brazil. Like the real is like 5 or 6 to $1. It translates exactly the same. Like 60 to $100, that's a huge price hike. That's a big ask. Are you really going to stay with Nintendo at that point? I'm sure some people will, but most people won't. So I think they're going to end up, if anybody's going to make them fail, it's not going to be the United States. It's not going to be Canada. It's not going to be Europe. It's probably going to be South American, Asian countries, and so on. And they might fail because of that. What's going to be really funny to watch is if they do in fact succeed in selling these games for $80 and the audience is there, it's going to be all of these average to mediocre other AAA game studios trying to sell their games for $80 and failing miserably, and like within the first month all their games being half off. And then they will learn their lesson, or they're going to go out of business and new studios will crop up, or the existing studios are going to learn from their mistakes and not be greedy and realize that they're not Nintendo, they're not Rockstar, they're not Baldur's Gate, they need to chill out. So it's a balancing act. I think the market eventually regulates itself. And then you have another beautiful component of this, which is a global market and a global economy, right? Which are developers in Asia that are coming out and making some really, really good games with really, really efficient budgets. So I think a lot of interesting things to come from this. I think the most likely outcome is, unfortunately, you have your traditional like EA games, like your FIFAs, your 2Ks, your Call of Duties. Those will probably end up going to 80 eventually, and they will succeed because, 40-year-old electrician Tom that makes $100K a year is not going to care that the game went up 20 bucks. They have the disposable income, they're going to buy it. So that core audience is always going to be there no matter what they price the game at. But some of these more niche titles are going to fail and it's not going to work out, and they're going to have a reality check and have to adjust the price accordingly. So maybe that even, does create a little bit more of a fluctuating market. Maybe that does in fact create a less rigid standard price for games. Everything needs to be $60, everything needs to be $70 or $80. Maybe that creates some fluctuation. I don't know. That's maybe just wishful thinking. Maybe we're all just going to get screwed in the end, but these are the things that I can see possibly happening, not right away, but kind of down the line. I think that the $70 price hike, a lot of people, even if reluctantly, they did accept it because games were priced at $60 for so long. There's no way you could continue the same price, right? It made sense, but such a fast price hike now to 80, I think they're going to end up getting screwed. That's just my opinion. And like I said before, I think you're going to see a lot of piracy. I think you're going to see a lot of people emulating games or just gravitating to older games in general, right? Every time I fire up RimWorld or something like that, I know the game's going to work. I know it. I'm going to have the best time of my life no matter what. When I buy a new game, it might look cool, but you never really know. So I think less and less, more and more people are going to be willing to take that chance, especially now on an $80 price tag, So anyway, if I had to put the word out there, I would say, please don't support Nintendo. Please don't buy the game. I know that a lot of people will anyway. I get it. I think that my wife will probably buy the Switch 2 no matter what I say. She doesn't care. She loves Nintendo. So, it's going to happen. But if I were to give you like, hey, please don't buy it, that's what I would say. If I were to give you my plea here and my opinion, I don't think you should support Nintendo in this. I think they're being greedy. I think they know they have everybody by the balls. I think they know they've created this very exclusive niche market of extremely dedicated people, and they're taking advantage of them. So you shouldn't support them. And the consequence is not just going to be on you, because if Nintendo succeeds, it is going to have a trickle-down effect, most likely to all other AAA games. And in general, the cost of games is going to go up as a consequence. If Rockstar finds out that Mario Kart is succeeding and selling for $80, do you think they're not going to jack up the price to $100? Probably they will. So it's going to end up hurting everybody in the end. It's not just going to hurt Nintendo consumers. It's going to hurt everybody. I think down the line, hopefully, the market will regulate itself, but maybe it won't. Maybe people will buy it anyway, and now your games just cost $80. Congratulations. So we'll see. Maybe there's some hope, like I said, in the global market. I don't know. Sorry for rambling. Don't forget to hit this video with a thumbs up if you did enjoy the conversation. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for sticking around till the very end here.